A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. From William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. There are many different ways to render a rose. In this short series, we'll do just that with OLO markers and the same rose line art. This video will focus on more traditional illustration style, blending, and continuous layering. If you would like to follow along and render your own rose, you can find it on our website on the resources page. The OLO marker theme we're using today is Vintage Rose. Both of these links can be found in the description below. To get started, we're going to use R5.1 Peony and R5.3 Dusty Rose. You can see here I'm filling in the center of the petals with my R5.1. I want to put a base coat down and save room on the edges for where I'm going to shade or lighten up. You'll notice as I'm coloring that all of my markers actually have two ends. OLO is really great for customizing. So what I went ahead and did is took my two colors and put them together on a single marker. These two are blending pairs, so it allows me to put my base coat down and then quickly flip to the darker side. Using R5.3 Dusty Rose, I'm coloring the insides of the petals. This is going to allow the alcohol to bleed into the lighter pieces, and we're going to get some natural looking shadows as we go towards the center of the rose. This is important for building depth. We're going for something a little more realistic while still sticking to an illustration style. You will notice in some areas I'm using more of a stippling technique where I gently dab the marker down onto the edges. I want to do this so I don't get too dark too quickly, and it also allows me to control the bleed a lot easier. I will gently work section by section. Do this to make sure that every part of the flower is consistent and looks like it all belongs together. It's important not to jump into too much detail right away. Now that I feel fairly confident about my shadows, I'll flip back over to R5.1 and gently brush the edges of R5.3, my darker tone. This is going to allow that alcohol to reactivate, and we're going to get a very nice smooth blend between these two. I'm not going to blend out every single petal. It's important to recognize a hard contrast, which will actually create a cast shadow, versus a very smooth gradient, which creates volume. Some of the petals are going to have more volume and bend a little bit more, whereas some others are going to be more folded and cast a hard line shadow. Now that I'm happy with my base tone, we're going to move on to two darker tones, R5.5 Astilbe and R5.7 Amaranth. You'll notice again that these two are blending pairs. I'm going to start with R5.5 and then quickly switch over to R5.7 to utilize the alcohol and just bleed everything to become as smooth as possible. I need that center petal to pop out more, so I'm going to go in with a much darker color and really work the inner corners of this. This is going to help give us a focal point to look at and allow our eyes to follow its gaze around this flower. A pro tip is to work one blending family at a time, meaning if you're working with red, work with your red family. It will help keep your artwork clean and concise. It also makes blending just that much easier. One thing I really love to do is to just put down two colors and watch the way they wash over each other. It's a really amazing push and pull right up until the point when they dry. And you can saturate the page and get a beautiful watercolor look, but it's so much more forgiving than watercolor is. So I've gotten into this mindset of just try things and see how it works out. Might be why we have so many different styles, even with alcohol markers. Now we will bring back in our first two colors, R5.1 and R5.3. We're going to use these to enhance the colors that we have here already and continue to build. This is more of a messy, painterly style, so don't be afraid to change up these four colors and see how you can build from dark to light or vice versa. Here I am really letting myself focus on the inner parts of these petals. Meanwhile, I actually want to leave the outer part of these petals as close to paper as possible. I want to use that natural page color to be my highlight. Why do more work when you don't have to? This is going to help pop out those petals and give us a more realistic feel that's just right. I like to sometimes sit back and look at what I'm creating when I've just moved past that ugly point where you're kind of still thinking about the shapes and the shading and how it's going to look. I love that moment when you get out of that and you see that potential. Not only do you see it, but people that you show it to see that potential now. It's gone from an idea to reality. And there's something really amazing about that. So I love getting to this point where most of the object can be filled. There's still a lot more work to be done. There's definitely a lot more blending and layering that we have to do. But just having the ability to go back and forth with my dark and lights and having it just kind of pre-organized, or even if I built the palette myself, making life a little easier and taking some of that guesswork out, knowing that your ugly stage will not be as long as perhaps it had been in the past. And that's how you learn. You work past that ugly stage. So here we are at this point. If you lean back, you can really see that this flower is coming to shape. It's starting to look more real. I almost want to lean in closer and just smell it. And I mean, I know it's not going to smell like a rose, but it's nice to dream. Using amaranth and astilbe, I'm doing very soft dabbing lines on the very edges or the outer edge. This creates a hard line and a hard divide between the white from the outer petal and the darkness of the petal underneath. It creates that illusion of depth. Our 5.3 Dusty Rose might be one of my favorite colors. It's just very soft. The pink rose is now at a good stopping point. We're going to allow the alcohol to dry and move on to our first yellow rose. We're going to be using yellow orange 2.2 pudding and yellow orange 2.3 butterscotch. Just like the pink rose, we need to set our foundation. So I'm going in with pudding. The center of the petals need to be filled in so I can decide where I'd like my darker tones to go. Once I'm confident with the placement, I will flip my marker over and start using YO 2.3 butterscotch. This is going to act as our midtone. So I'm going to pull from the center and out again. So keeping in mind that each of these petals are layered on top of each other, trying to make sure that I accommodate for the brighter areas of petals that are blooming outward. This tends to be the challenge when creating flowers, because it sometimes can be hard to figure out which way those petals are leaning. I'll continue to flip my marker and use these blending pairs in order to smooth out this color. Now that our light base tones are good and blended, we're going to add two more colors. YO 2.5 Yellow Orchid and YO 2.7 Sepia. These are going to act as our darker tones. We're going to go over our intersections here and continue that bleed. We're getting deeper, more value. I'm going to use sepia, our darkest yellow orange here, in order to accentuate the folds within each of these petals. This illustration style is not just about blending, but about creating texture. And that is where a lot of our brush strokes, starting from the inner and then gently pulling out, is going to create that texture within that rose. You may have noticed that I'm not capping the markers that I've been using. OLO is created with a closed system inside of it, meaning that no air is going to come or go in there. So as long as I'm working with the markers, there is actually no reason for me to cap them. Along with blending pairs connected on a single marker, it has saved me a lot of time. The petal I'm working on right now might be my favorite one so far. It's important to note that as you put more color down, the page will become more saturated, which will allow colors to blend more. However, if you begin to oversaturate the page, it will become harder to control. If you feel it's getting a little too hard to control, I say step back from it and start on a new area. So that way you can allow the alcohol to dry, you can always come back in and reactivate it. We don't want to create mud, we want to create flowers. The rose on the bottom is buried underneath, so I'm actually going to use yellow orange 2.5 yellow ochre and yellow orange 2.7 sepia. And these are really going to be the only two that we use. We don't need to get brighter because this rose is underneath our big pink rose. So we can really just have fun with these two colors and just sort of layering on top of one another. Doesn't mean I can't use a lighter yellow as a blender though. I'm going to use G1.4 spearmint and G1.7 evergreen for the first step of the leaves. I'm going to use the very tip to mark off the actual stem and then use my 1.4 spearmint to start to pull out the top part and the fattest part of my leaves. We're going to use this to create more of a negative space for where the stem and all the little veins will come out. Now I'm going to add more muted greens, yellow green 8.3 lichen and yellow green 8.7 fern. The reason why I want more muted tones as a base for my leaves is because they are further back from the roses that are in the foreground. Although we started with spearmint and evergreen, the yellow-green underneath is going to help recolor it and shift that tone so we can achieve that look of the leaves being underneath our flowers. Notice how I often start in the middle and pull out to the edges. I like to follow the way that the normal leaf's grain would actually be. Do little strokes, pulling it out in order to cover our leaf. Again, we need to work with texture. And this is going to create the texture that we want. I really love how OLO's yellow greens are still strong enough to really stand out against such strong colors like green. I'm now using G1.7 Evergreen to create the inner stem and redefine all the little veins that are inside the leaf. Little details like this make an entire piece so much fun. If you really look closely, you can see that negative space within the lighter green on the leaves. That's what's really guiding me to how I think those veins inside the leaf should go. I'm just using the darker evergreen to better define it. I'll then go back in a little bit later on with a spearmint or maybe even one of the more muted greens or a yellow green to really better define the lighter areas, those veins, the stem, going right into the little spears. You can really do a lot by switching back and forth and climbing that ladder up and down. So using your values, and I'm going to continue to do just that. I'm going to switch back and forth between my lights and my darks to keep building up that value. And the end result is actually pretty fun. Because I've been working with spearmint and evergreen for a little bit, the leaves have kind of lost their yellow hue I was hoping to get. So I'm going to bring yellow-green 8.7 fern back in. I'm gently going to go over some of these darker lines that I've put down with this so we can drag that hue closer to that yellow that I wanted originally. It's going to continue to be a push and a pull until I get it to a point where I feel it's just right. I'm now using spearmint to blend out the fern and evergreen, make this a little softer. With the leaves where I want them to be, I'm going to take yellow-green 8.7 fern to go into my yellow flowers and add a little extra shadow. Because the flowers have had a chance to dry, I can now go in and not worry about the bleed getting out of control and making mud. Following the same idea of adding detail, I'm going to use two very special colors, Red Gray 3 and Red Black. Using RK, I will go ahead and add those deep darks that I've been holding off on. This works great on any warm tones, hues, or values. I will use the Red Gray 3 as a blender for the Red Black in order to soften it. I am again going to use R5.5 Astilbe and R5.7 Amaranth. We're going to go in, add a little more texture, and then blend out any pieces that look a little out of place. This is where we finally get to go in and do some of those finer details and cleanup work. I'm going to use Blue-Green 0.8 Deep Sea for the leaves. When I'm moving into the finishing stages of an illustration, I like to cycle through all of the colors that I have used and go back in to each space that I have colored, smoothing out anything that might have gotten a little ruffled. In this case, I'm also using the RG3 or Red Gray 3 to create a warm border around my work. I'll continue to deepen my tones until it all feels just right. And here we have pink and yellow roses in an illustration style. I wonder how sweet these smell. Did you follow along? Did you discover anything interesting while coloring? And how differently did your rose come out from mine? Please share what you find and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Please like and subscribe. I'm Mina from OLO. I hope you have a colorful day.